Thanks to everyone for tuning in to today's webinar. It's going to be an exciting lunchtime session. I hope that everyone in New South Wales has, and Victoria and ACT has good home-cooked lunch in front of them. I'll certainly be ducking out for a bite straight after this. I don't know, what about you, Lou? What's on your lunch agenda?
A picnic, probably. No, picnics for everything. Yeah, no, looking forward to this one. Thanks everyone for joining us. Have we got, Maddie, have we got everyone?
Yeah, if you guys want to kick off, I'll follow up with a few latecomers.
Great. Well, thanks for coming, everyone. And for those of you I haven't met, I'm Louise Harlan-Cox, Priya's CEO. And just stepping in for Chris Savage, who's had some last minute urgent client business pop up. So he sends his apologies and he'll be watching the recording with great interest, no doubt. So I just wanted to welcome you all, and Shane's already jumped in there. So if you don't already know Shane is the Managing Director and Founder of Public Address. He's also knows everything there is to know about CommTech, which is why we're here today. And Shane will be walking you through a roadmap and a framework whereby we can start looking at where agencies are placed on that, where the maturity levels are, and what the future holds in terms of being able to put that tech into practice and have a framework driving the pathway to the future. So I'll, without further ado, I think I'll hand over to Shane, and I'll pop back in at the end and update you on some other things that we have coming up as well. Shane, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Louise, and thank you everyone for dialing in today. Really excited to have a chat to you about a topic that is both professionally and personally very close to my heart, and that is CommTech and the CommTech Maturity Framework, and how importantly, how you can apply that to your agencies and use that to drive a whole range of benefits. And we're going to cover a bit of ground today in our session. We're going to start with a bit of a 101 on CommTech and why CommTech. I'll then introduce the CommTech Maturity Framework, which is a roadmap and a guide for communications leaders, both in-house and in agency, to navigate the world of communications technology, implement solutions that can help you to grow and prosper in this new and wonderfully different world. And then we're going to dive into CommTech for agencies, because there's really two parts of the CommTech discussion that we need to have. One is around the tools that we use as communicators, and the other part of this is the tools that we use as agency leaders to drive more efficiency and innovation within our agencies. And then we're going to close off with a discussion around how CommTech can actually drive a higher intellectual property in your agency and allow you to capture a lot of the IP that is present in your staff. But as we all know, staff are liable to move around, and especially with a lot of wage inflation at the moment, staff are moving around more than ever before. And so capturing some of that IP for your agency is more important than ever. And then we'll finish off with 3 ways to kickstart your productivity dividend. A quick snap of the 3 things you can do tomorrow to get that moving. Also, thank you for the message that I just received about my hair looking quite long and excellent. It's having a bit of a wild time at the moment, as I am in New South Wales and haven't seen a barber for a bit too long. But anyway, on to the important stuff. What is CommTech? CommTech is technology that caters to the specific needs of the communications profession, helping us to work more efficiently and effectively. And efficient and effective is underlined and bordered there because that efficiency is really important, but so is that effectiveness. And so I'll touch on each of those, on why each of those is important briefly, before we get into the CommTech Maturity Framework. So we all want more effective communications. I think, well, what we do today is excellent. There is always room for improvement. And so this is actually now quite an aging article, but it is one of those kind of seminal touch points. You might remember the discussion about how Target in the United States was able to predict that there was a pregnant teenager actually in a household of shoppers, and send catered, targeted, personalized messages to that family. The father of that household then turned up to Target demanding to know why they had sent this targeted advertising to his household. and then only had to come back a few weeks later sheepishly when he understood that his daughter was actually pregnant, and so of course she'd been receiving that targeted direct mail. And I suppose the question that this leaves me with, and which I touch on in the CommTech Users Guide, which you can receive a copy of after this, is if marketing was able to predict that an individual teenage girl was pregnant in 2012, in 2021, can we start to predict the future for communications? Can we predict the stories that a journalist will be interested in? Can we predict the stakeholder response using data, analytics, and science when we're engaging in a heated stakeholder engagement campaign? Can we predict the reaction of regulators based on detailed analysis of the data? And I think it will come as no surprise to you that I strongly believe that we can actually use that data to inform these outcomes. But as with any big endeavor, there's a lot of steps in between here and that outcome. And so the CommTech Maturity Framework will take you through those steps and why some of the stepping stones and the building blocks that we put in place now are incredibly important and allow us to take some of these bigger leaps in the future. Of course, the other side of that is efficiency. And I think one of the really important points here is that we've actually had a real drop in communications, in the efficiency of our communications profession in Australia in terms of a couple of ways that we can measure it. So I know, and this is a graph, so I apologize for bringing a graph to a comms presentation. We won't stay on the graph for too long. But if you look here on the orange line, you've got communications productivity in Australia, and that productivity growth per hour of labour put into the economy in Australia. And we know that Australia broadly has a productivity problem, but I think the stunning thing here is that actually communications agencies have become less productive over time when we measure the productivity per staff member that we're able to drive. So our average hourly billing rates have dropped by nearly 10% over the past 10 years as we measure in the RCG benchmark survey. And what we've done to make up for that is we've actually increased the amount of revenue per principal. So what you would have seen on the ground is probably that your teams have gotten larger, and the amount of revenue that you as a partner or a director or a principal, the agency are personally responsible for, has increased, but you've also grown the team to accommodate that. And you've grown the team beyond what you probably needed to deliver that. And I think a big part of the gap and why we haven't seen the productivity growth per employee, and we've gone down to $130,000 per employee of billings, not $180,000 per employee of billings, is because we haven't invested in technology as a profession. And so the OECD has done some really interesting work, which I won't dive into too much here, but you can see that technology, if you're operating on that technology frontier and you're the top 5% of firms, you can actually drive a really marked increase in productivity over time. Yet you're just not seeing in those firms who are not on that technology frontier and not actually driving that productivity growth from that. And I suppose that really answers the question of why CommTech. On the left-hand side there, we've got some of the kind of current ways of doing things, where quite often we're reinventing the wheel when it comes to processes, media lists, and drafting materials. We're facing a constant data loss. We're constantly having staff walk out the door, and our IP is eroded by the fact that that people leave our firm, and we're not capturing that data inside the firm. And we also rely heavily on intuition, which is really great, but there are some other ways that we can look at the world. So what CommTech allows us to do is shift towards a shared understanding of stakeholders and tools. Move to that shared understanding of tools, and we can also move to capture our IP. And sorry, I've just got a message that there's some noise in the background. Give me one. sorry about that. I've just asked the person unpacking the dishwasher to quiet down for a little bit. Apologies for that. Happy to duck back over any questions that you have about some of the stuff that we worked through there. So we can move from a constant data loss to capturing and increasing your intellectual property. And we can also move from that intuition to prediction and forecasting the future and how we can help to have a look at the future, have a range of forecasts which enable us to predict different outcomes, and then as professionals interpret those forecasts that the data gives us to allow us to understand what the best course of action to take is. So without further ado, I'll jump into the CommTech Maturity Framework, and this is quite a lot to take in one go, so don't worry too much about taking this in immediately now. And I will share a link to the CommTech Users Guide, which takes you through all this in a lot more detail at the end of this presentation. But essentially on the bottom there, we've got CommTech adoption and the pace of adoption over time. And on the left-hand side, we've got the building blocks and what I call the CommTech maturity curve, which takes us up through to the full potential of CommTech when we get to the end at predicting. When we see that we've got starting, and that's really starting our CommTech journey, we've got the data, engagement, and monitoring, which are the building blocks of the CommTech maturity framework and our CommTech tools. We've also got then our next step along is sharing, and when we start to share engagement data and build a common understanding of stakeholders, as well as monitoring, and still monitoring being separate. And then as we go through the linking, you'll see that we start to link together our engagement and monitoring tools so that we can have a shared linked understanding of the outcome of our campaigns and what has happened. And then we've also got the final step in the middle of the curve there is automating. And when we can start to automate some common everyday tasks so that we can have better outcomes from our communications activity, and we can use data to build those predictive tools. And then finally, as we really start to get up the CommTech framework, we've got synthesizing and predicting. These are really where CommTech starts to do some of the things that we'd really associate with needing a human to interpret that, and where we can start to build some great forecasts of what might happen in the future. And that's where in synthesizing, the computers are starting to synthesize different data sources and give us a single point of view of the stakeholder or the issue, and that's really powerful. And then finally, we get to the realm of AI and prediction of outcomes, where we can start to say that if we undertake this particular engagement strategy, we could have this outcome, or if we take this engagement strategy, we might have this outcome as well. And of course, what's missing from the CommTech Maturity Framework, because this is designed to sit across all of the communications industry, not just agencies, is what I call the enabling tools. And the enablement sits around and underneath all of these tools to help bring them together so that you can work more efficiently as an agency and more effectively as an agency. And what you'll see here is that we've got the building blocks of the CommTech framework, and the building blocks allow us to map the tools that we have today and the tools that we commonly use today to the CommTech framework. So on the left-hand side, we have data, and these are what you'd typically think of as either a media context database or a media coverage database as well. And I separate out data as an individual building block because, as you'll see, a lot of what we do is look at how we can capture data and capture that data in a way that we can actually use it to build on that capturing of data through using different techniques and tools and capabilities there. And so you'll see there as well that we use, you'd be used to having a media context database, but I also refer to historical media coverage as well. You might use Factiva, or a lot of people use, Google search even, just to understand stakeholder sentiment and understanding of what's going on in the community. And they'll use historical media coverage to do that. And that's quite different to monitoring, which you'll see at the other end, where you've got real or near real-time monitoring of stakeholders. And that's a near real-time engagement tool where you're seeking to understand what's happening in the media right now, not understanding over a longer and bigger time scale the actual data which underlies which underlies trends and themes which you see in the community. And in the middle, we have engagement. And engagement, as public address is the media relationships management platform. And you'll be able to see that engagement is obviously an area that I'm really excited about. But I think that the CRM type product and customer relationship management tool type products, which other industries have been using for some time now, there's some really powerful potential as we start to use some of those engagement tools inside the public relations profession, and use that to track data over time. And finally, of course, measurement underlies all of this. And measurement is, the third rail of communications activity, which you tend to try and, is a very vexed question. So we touch on it, but we touch on it in a slightly different way when we're looking at it from a CommTech perspective. And I think we've also, Maddie, I think we've got a Q&A prepared, sorry, not a Q&A. We have a poll that everyone can undertake here in terms of having an understanding of where you're at in terms of implementing those building blocks. So perhaps if Maddie, you can chuck that in to the audience, and then we can fill those out, fill out that survey. Awesome. Thanks, Maddie. And what I'll do is I'll keep on talking through. The slides as we go here. So and then. Oh, sorry, we've just lost our screen share. Sorry, can you see that again?
Yeah.
Yeah, sorry about that. So we'll continue to talk through this here with sharing as you answer those polls. And so we've got the shared understanding of the stakeholder there as well, where through linking the data and engagement blocks of the CommTech Maturity Framework, you start to become able to see a single point of view of every engagement with the community. And so that data, when we talk about data, we say, that data is typically buried in inboxes and phones and call records and notes. I used to keep notes about conversations I was having on my desk, but through having a single point of view of every engagement with the individual journalist and with the individual stakeholder, whether it's a politician or whether it's a community activist or a community member that we're engaging with, you can see the linkages between what has happened, whether it's a piece of media coverage or a pitch or engagement, and some of those outcomes. And the way that we talk about that in public address is that you can see both the media contact, but also the coverage of what they've written about in the past. And we refer to that coverage as data. And so that coverage of what they've written about in the past is going to influence what they write about in the future. And through seeing those two things together in one place, you're able to have unparalleled access and insight into what the journalist is covering and what their likely response to a pitch is going to be. And if you take this a step further in terms of community engagement and even political engagement, imagine having a track record of everything that the politician has said in Parliament that you're able to search, sitting next to a database of every engagement that your customer or client has had with that politician, and then you can use that to really inform and deepen your understanding of what the politician's likely response to any piece of communication is going to be. The next phase of the CommTech Maturity Framework is linking, and that's linking engagement to outcomes. And I know that always, as a profession, trying to capture exactly how a story comes about or a particular outcome comes about can be difficult. But when we're using a customer relationship management system or a special system for each set of communications activities, we're able to establish these links much more clearly, because you can track the exact email that resulted in the pitch being secured for the journalist. Or again, if we're talking about stakeholder engagement for a community project, we can establish the link between the piece of engagement with that individual stakeholder and the actual outcome. And not only is this great in terms of measurement, but through combining monitoring of events, and when I use monitoring, not just media monitoring, but real-time stakeholder monitoring, social, digital monitoring, we can actually log those outcomes next to that engagement. I've got the example here of journalist profiles, but definitely legislative outcomes, political engagement. Being able to provide direct links between that means that we can learn from each engagement and each result. And importantly, we also start to build a longer term investment in the intellectual property of our agency through linking that engagement strategy to outcomes. And finally, the final kind of what I call the middle of the curve is automating. And automating really is where we start to see some of that efficiency dividend. So we have the linking of data and engagement allows us to also think of any repeatable or predictable task that we undertake. And I've got building a media list for an example here, but equally it's a lot of those really data intensive tasks where we are looking at a lot of data and then trying to pull an outcome from that. So with a media list, if you think about the process for building a media list, typically people will search coverage and try and find the right journalists and the right sectors to pitch, and then go and look for the journalists who are covering that and add them to their media list. And that's what I call quite a repeatable task that we can start to automate. And when we actually link that data of the historical coverage or social media posts or reactions and link that to our engagement, we're actually able to start to effectively train machines to do that work for us. And we also, as we start to train the machines to do that work for us, we start to see the foundations of a predictive capability in this. Because, for example, in public address, when you get given a media list that you've generated based on the journalists who are covering a particular set of topics, we make a prediction of whether that journalist is going to be interested in that story. And then we store that prediction. So in the future, you can go, oh, actually, that journalist did cover that. And so that predictive capability is really valuable. Or it didn't quite hit the mark with this piece of coverage, and investigate why. And so that predictive capability is probably the most exciting part that we carry through as we start to get up to the real top of the CommTech Maturity Framework. I should also say, if there are any questions, please drop them in the chat or drop them in the Q&A. Really happy to take them as we go along through the session today. And we also get, so as we move towards the top of the CommTech Maturity Framework, we see that we start to synthesize data. And so synthesis is, really right now, think about the synthesis, the combining of different trends to derive an insight that we do on a daily basis. That is, really the realm of people at the moment. But machines are making increasing, and machines and algorithms are making increasing forays into this space. And when we're, as a communications profession, able to link those three building blocks, we start to be able to see a single point of view of the issue, not just for us as communicators, but also executives. If you think of a crisis situation, I'm sure we've all had more than our fair share of crises and issues for clients. Think if you're able to bring together every media query, every response, the coverage, and the real-time social media posts into one dashboard, and so that you can instantly link, if you had a surge in media coverage to the social media posts that spark that, so that you could get ahead of that to go and find that social media user and have a discussion with them to try and solve their concerns before they drive another wave of coverage. And through having that single point of view, we're able to draw some really powerful insights into how our responses have fed a story, or look at other issues that have similarities in the past, and use that to inform. And that's really, that synthesis is really exciting in terms of a very achievable building block for us as a profession, to be able to bring together that into one dashboard. And I do, the synthesizing is typically a problem that you have to really work deeply with a client to solve. A lot of this data will be stored inside their systems, or it might be stored inside their just in the client's head, but there is a huge amount of value that as an agency you can build in embedding yourself with the client if you do have these systems which are able to bring together a single point of view of the issue, which the client can't have by themselves. And finally, we get to the really pointy end of the maturity curve, and that's predicting. And I use the phrase predicting and forecasting quite interchangeably when we talk about this. I use in the user's guide the example of a weather forecast. We have supercomputers which crunch weather forecasts for us, and they help us make the decision of whether we should take an umbrella out for a rainy day. And think of the machine capability to help with CommTech in a similar way. If we can forecast a likely outcome with great confidence, and the weather forecasts that we use and rely on a daily basis are anywhere between 60 and 100% accurate. You think about the difference for your day between 1 and 5 millimeters of rain, and that's kind of a good example of how that accuracy feeds into the decisions we make. So with the predictive capabilities of CommTech, we can start to make predictions about the reaction of a politician to a particular policy pledge. Is this policy pledge going to help support the other policies that they run with, or is this policy going to stand against this? How can we model what's happened in the past to help inform the future? On a more basic level, media relations, to be able to predict these journalists will pick up this story, or this journalist, whenever they cover an issue, they typically cover it 4 or 5 times. So we can predict with great confidence that because they've covered us once, we need to go into damage control mode and start to plan for what the next shoe to fall can be. And that right now is typically a lot of that relies on our intuition. But what we can do is use science to back that up and alert really interesting and potentially damaging outcomes ahead of them occurring. And I think the kind of final point that I make here in terms of predicting is really to try and bring together why data and capturing and collating and storing data in an accessible way is so important to our profession. In law, they have made vast use of machine learning for things like discovery, for identifying, in the US, they can even identify which judge they should put a particular case in front of through analysing all of that judge's other judgments on a particular matter. And lawyers are able to, and are ahead of us on their law tech maturity curve, because they have so much well-categorized data. And the reason that we're a little bit behind is partially because we don't have the same level of detail and understanding of the data as it sits today. And that's just because a lot of that engagement data gets lost to the ether or lost to the paper as soon as the engagement is undertaken and we move on to the next thing. And finally, that third rail, as promised, measurement. And measurement for CommTech, when we talk about CommTech, is probably one of the more under-resourced and understudied areas. We've got great media monitoring tools, but we're only starting to see some individual tools start to help us really to understand measurement and impact. I think of things like the Communications Dividend. It's a piece of software out of which looks at a real-time analysis of all of the different communications avenues and sources, Google Analytics, media coverage, and bring them together into a real-time dashboard where we can start to look at outtakes and outcomes. And measurement is increasingly important for the PR, the communications profession, because for us to take full advantage of CommTech and machines, we need to be able to tell them what the result that we want looks like. So I've got here the three measurement aspects that we should be looking at from a CommTech perspective. And one is outputs, capturing and storing the outputs of a communications program produced by the agency in a single place. And those outputs, whether it's a media release, a video, or a social engagement campaign, or increasingly some advertising and some activations. If we store those outputs and store those in a system where we can also then line up the outtakes of the campaign, measuring what changed in our audience as a result of the campaign. Did we lift awareness? Did we change perspectives on a campaign? Did we increase the number of people who were supportive of a project by 5%? Did we change how a previously negative issue was portrayed in the media to a really positive issue? And then we can also, if we bring in outtakes, we can also bring in outcomes. And those are the business outcomes driven by our communication strategy. Those are the hard rubber hits the road. To say, you know, the communications campaign drove a 20% increase in the applications for a product, or a 5% increase in sales. And I think here we can also be really bold to draw those links between what we were able to see as a profession and what we're able to achieve and the outcomes of that as well. And all of that comes together into the CommTech map. And the CommTech map gives you in one place all the data, engagement, monitoring tools, and measurement tools for the profession. And probably a good point to pause. And Maddie, if we close that poll, do you want to chuck the results up on screen? And so here we can start to see, you know, how those line up with the results there. So obviously Icentia's still got strong, Meltwater Stream making a few forays into agency, still quite a few people on MailChimp. We've got on using MailChimp for distribution and marketing. It's definitely a great resource in terms of getting started in this space. Got telemedia in there, of course, public address, thank you. No kind of random ones there. Talkwalker has seemed to decline in popularity. There was a bit where they were really popular, but you can see how the kind of, you can see how the different tech stack that people are using comes together. And that a lot of this is built around some of the kind of legacy products where we just need monitoring. And so Meltwater provided quite a competitive offering there for a while. And how we can start to link those together as well. If you look at back at the CommTech map, you can see how some of those data tools actually provide some engagement capability, how some of the monitoring tools also provide engagement and data capability. And also measurement down in the corner as we try to improve the linkages between the different parts of our system. And the question that typically comes up here is, how do I start? And the best place to start is to determine your data sources. So if you look at what data you have and what data you want to have available, and then look at how you can actually build a system that can capture that data and capture that engagement. You can then determine what your engagement strategy looks like. How can you actually automate some of that data capture, and that's where things like CRM type tools like Public Address and HubSpot and some of what Meltwater is doing as well come in, because you can automate a lot of that previously time-consuming work and capture all of that engagement as you're going. And then finally, bring your data together, and this is the most challenging part of the CommTech build. Is actually bringing that data together. So in one place, you can see the media coverage you've secured, the engagement that led to it, and use that to inform future campaigns. And I think that for the PR, for the communications profession, we're probably going to have to put up with a bit more time of having separate bundles of technology for data, engagement, and monitoring. But I think, certainly in Public Address's roadmap, bringing those things together in one place are sooner than we might realize. And then all of that comes together through to your new CommTech stack. And of course, tools for enablement and workflow collaboration are incredibly important. So what I will dive into here, and as we go through this section in terms of enablement, which for those of you who have joined us late, we've separated out the enablement tools that a communications agency can use to build your CommTech, environment and make your workforce more efficient. We've separated those out from the CommTech stack, which applies more broadly across every communications professional. So to recap on why efficiency is so important, here again, we've got that graph that shows GDP productivity in Australia going up, and we've got communications agency productivity going down. And that starts in 2010 with $180,000 per individual communications professional in revenue, and ends in 2020 with $130,000 per individual professional in terms of billings. And so that $50,000 gap is really an opportunity for for every communications agency. Technology can lift productivity by as much as 6%. So, that's an extra nearly $10,000 in billings that you could probably realize through implementing the right set of technologies for your business. And I separate those out in terms of three different productivity dividends that we can achieve. One is workforce. Things like time-sheeting software. We have amazing time-sheeting software available, which digitizes what we used to do in Excel and also enables us to do things like real-time capacity planning in the workforce. We've also got HR and workforce development tools like Employment Hero, which can, again, automate and take a lot of the stress out of making sure that we're training and doing the right things by our workforce through tracking them automatically in the background and prompting the people leaders in your business to take action, to have that mentored catch up, to have that check in on that training program and help out with that. Then in the middle, we've got client and new business development. If you do one thing from today, and I'll repeat this later, get a CRM for your business. Even if you don't get a CRM for stakeholder engagement, get a CRM for your business. Tracking client engagement and new business engagement is one of the greatest productivity dividends that we can achieve, because picking up a client conversation, when client conversations are all stored in a customer relationship management system, and new business conversations are all stored in a customer relationship management system, you save time on picking up a new project with a new client, understanding the ways of doing things and the ways of working with different clients, and bringing that all together in one place. We also have a range of project management tools, Trello, Asana, that help us to standardize the processes for different endeavors, and then use those, use those time and time again. If you think about all the times that you've reused that one slide from a new business deck, and that is the same kind of force multiplier and productivity multiplier that you're able to achieve through sharing resources around the agency and standardizing some processes to enable more labor sharing between teams. And that sharing of hours between teams is also something that once we get our workforce tools in right, and we've got real-time capacity planning so that you can see who has some spare time and some spare resources and use that spare time and resources is incredibly useful. And we've also got services. Obviously, building a CommTech stack is incredibly productivity enhancing. And it also allows us to move more from hourly services to actually implementing products. I use the example with public address clients all the time of a media list. Right now, through a lot of traditional tools, it takes hours to build a media list, check that media list and make sure you've got the right people on it. If you're building that same media list in public address and using our automated functions to build that media list, which look at the media coverage that has come through before and use that to predict who's going to be interested in the story you're writing in, you can actually charge a fixed fee for that media list. And it doesn't matter whether it took the person 5 minutes or 3 hours, it provides the same benefit to the client. And so that's where you can start to see how the CommTech stack can actually enable greater productivity in your agency. The other couple of things there in terms of services are, increasingly in-housing creative services, bringing in some of the third-party services, video, digital, graphic design. I particularly call out our colleagues on the call from Queensland, where there's just an incredible crop of agencies who have in-housed a whole bunch of the creative services and digital marketing capabilities to enable that. I also, and I promise these are the last two graphs, just want to share two quick things. We touched before on the global frontier firms in terms of that productivity growth. And again, it shows that those global frontier firms who adopt technology achieve 1.6 times the productivity growth and this is at an individual firm labor hour level. So every hour of your staff time produces 1.6 times more output under this analysis. And when we say 1.6 times output, think of that as 1.6 times billing. And the laggard firms, which as our earlier graph showed us a lot of PR agencies are in, have very limited and no productivity growth because of that. And finally, this graph just gives you an idea of the Treasury separated out the energy and metal mining firms who are able to achieve greater productivity growth because of the use of technology, and looking at things like data analytics, which we can easily build into public relations, management quality and intelligent software systems, all things that we can achieve. And you just see that there's a far greater share of those really high productivity firms who are adopting those technologies than who are not. And finally, I promised that I'd finish off in terms of your IP. And for me as a professional and with my agency background as well, building the IP of an agency is the most valuable thing that you can do, especially if you're looking to sell or trade the business. And building your IP for me and the link to CommTech is really simple. Think of all of the IP that is in the individual heads of your staff, whether that's a new business lead, whether that's a way of working with a client, whether that's a way of working with a journalist, whether that's a way of the right person to contact in a minister's office. CommTech allows us to move from IP sitting in that individual staff member's head who could walk out the door at any time to putting the IP in a platform where it's stored. And through having the IP in the platform, you're able to achieve IP in the agency so that you're no longer reliant on the individual person inside your agency to deliver that benefit. Pardon me, you can continue to repeatedly use the benefit of the insight that they had into a particular challenge a client was facing, even if they've left the agency or even if they're sick and off for the day. Media relations is a good place to start. Right now, it's all about individual relationships. But as we move towards the CommTech future and we have the relationship history in the platform, so that you're able to store and see every engagement with every journalist in the one place. And then it doesn't matter if Joe, who had a great relationship with Sam at the Sydney Morning Herald, leaves, because you have their relationship know-how that can be leveraged. Does that person like a photo with every pitch, or does that person love a really good in-depth data yard? You've actually got that know-how in a platform stored where you can leverage it. The same applies to client relationships and new business. Right now, again, individual relationships. But if you move all of that client engagement and new business engagement into a CommTech solution, you can actually start to have that relationship know-how stored and access that in the future in that CRM. And also from a capacity planning. Right now, again, you've probably got a very good picture at an individual or team level of capacity. But if we have a centralized planning and forecasting capability, and you can track all of that there, you can actually start to have a global view of agency capacity. And so that means that you can share capacity between teams, between different resources, between different factors, and use that really effectively. And I suppose I do love a chart, as you've seen, the graphic which actually demonstrates this most clearly for me is this. Right now, your corporate memory and your intellectual property is all stored in your staff. If that staff member leaves, a lot of that intellectual property leaves with them. That corporate memory is destroyed the moment they head to a competitor or an in-house role. Through CommTech, we can actually centralize and store that corporate memory and your intellectual property in one place, in one system, where you can actually leverage that time and time again, so that you can continue to use that no matter whether the person who created it or had the relationship with the journalist, the politician, the client, whether they left, you've got it all in one place, and you never have to have a client never has to have a conversation with you about the best ways to work with a new staff member. And finally, I did promise 3 things to do tomorrow, and I think I've probably hammered on about point 1, to implement a CRM for your stakeholders and clients to increase your intellectual property. Implement that for your stakeholders, implement it for your clients. And when I say stakeholders, and as you'll see in the CommTech User's Guide, we refer to stakeholders as any stakeholder who we're dealing with for the client's behalf. So whether that's a journalist, a politician, a community member, we have the stakeholder that includes those stakeholders, and implementing a CRM for them, such as public address, a little bit of a plug there, will help increase your intellectual property. And I also say definitely get a CRM for your clients as well. There are a range of great CRMs that are fantastic for dealing with clients, and you can definitely sign up for those as well. Public address, whenever we're dealing with media, we use public address. Whenever we're dealing with clients, we use HubSpot, because you just can't beat the tailored product and the tailored solution for the job that you're doing. Secondly, technology spend is an investment. It's not a recoverable cost. If you can view technology as an investment in a more efficient workforce and lift your average billings per staff member from that $130,000 per year where it's languishing at the moment, up to 180, up to 200, up to $230,000 a year, that is the true payback from investing in technology. Technology is an investment, not a recoverable cost. You do need to sacrifice some margin now to up your technology spend, so that in the future you can continue to secure more billings per hour for every single one of your resources. And finally, calculate the product cost of your services. As we move towards a CommTech future, the product cost of a service is going to be more important than the hourly cost of a staff member. We need to be comfortable with more fixed price fees. We've been talking about value-based pricing forever, and the true realization of value-based pricing for a PR agency is the product cost of the service. If we say a media relations campaign costs $20,000 and we spend $10,000 of staff time on it, there's your $20,000. And we can do that all across our products and services. And if we use more of the product cost of our service, that's a much better long-term outcome for our customers and for our clients. And I think that that's all we had, importantly, time for today. Realize that everyone wants to probably go and grab some lunch and get on to some pressing client issues. I'm happy to take any questions and comments that you might have as we wrap up. But otherwise, Louise has some things that she will finish off with. Thank you very much for tuning in and for joining us today.
Thanks, Shane. And Maddie, I'll leave you to just check and see if there's any questions coming in. I just wanted to say and just reiterate, that was fascinating. Thank you, Shane. And being from a membership management and association management background, you know, data and a CRM system is just always been the spine of engagement for us. So it's something that I'm quite passionate about myself, and I definitely, I can see the value in this industry, and I think it's a fascinating path for agencies to be on. What I will say, just a couple of things coming up. First of all, thank you, Shane. Appreciate you giving your time and putting the framework together. We do have, this is, I think, the second of a six-part series for RCG is hosting webinars. Guy Lamley on our first one, which was attracting, growing and keeping best talent. That's the recording still available to watch for that one. And we've got details of the third one being announced soon. So one thing I wanted to just let you know about, which is very exciting, we've got an announcement going out today, which you will see, which will be a intensive half-day event that we're hosting on the 18th of November. It's called the Agency Growth Accelerator. It will be a very exciting, short, sharp host of sessions, all about looking at ways that you can really accelerate growth in your agency into next year. We do have a headline speaker, Blair Enns, who is a specialist on productivity, pricing, and being able to optimize basically the financials around your agency, which is always an exciting place to start. So we do have an announcement going out later today, I think, or tomorrow morning. So keep an eye out for that one. It's going to be a great event and we'd love to have you on board. The other main thing is we've got our national conference starting next week. Hopefully you've all, of course, already bought your tickets, but it's running from Monday to Friday next week in the afternoons. So from 12:30 to around 4:30 each day. Fantastic roster of speakers. If you haven't actually booked your ticket, I suggest you jump in quickly because there's some surprises coming out in the mail for everyone later this week. And lastly, I just wanted to touch on the RCG benchmark study, which has been open. So given the timing with the conference, we have taken the decision to extend that. So there is still the opportunity to participate in that through till the 31st of October, which we're looking at reviewed benchmarks this year and some fantastic data and really great insights that you'll be able to get out of that. So if you've got any questions, do come through and ask the team, but you've got now until the 31st of October to get involved in that. So thank you, Shane. We've got the copy of the framework and the user's guide, the link there in the chat. And if you've got any questions at all, come through to us and I'm sure we can facilitate Shane coming back to you with some answers. So once again, thank you very much, Shane, and thank you everyone for participating.
Thanks so much, everyone.